Go ahead and get started since we're at the top of the hour. Okay, well, hello, YouTube, and thank you, Ghanshyam. We want to welcome everyone to this week's episode of OpenInfra Live. This is our new weekly hour-long interactive content event series streaming live to our OpenInfra YouTube channel on Thursdays at 1400 UTC. So today we are getting a very special behind-the-scenes look live at the PTG for the OpenStack Technical Committee's meeting today. So we appreciate you all letting us join. So Ghanshyam, I'll go ahead and turn it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ashlee. Thanks everyone for joining. And in this TCPTG session, we'll be discussing about our release cycle things. First of all, I'll share my Etherpad so that you can see the notes. And that, yeah, I hope everyone can see the Etherpad.
Yeah, see
you can. Yep. So this is our today topic at line number 39, the highlighted one. Let's move OpenStack to release cycle. So OpenStack is 6-month release cycle, and we are going to discuss about how we can make it yearly release cycle or not. So I'll let Zulia to give some background about this topic, and then we can start the discussion.
Absolutely. So this topic really came out of a weekly social call that the Irana community runs, which is geared at basically social interaction, trying to keep us human and relatable. And we were discussing one of our new features, and one of the operators, because the Irana community has several operators that also contribute, basically said that it'll be a very long time, if they were to ever get the upstream feature that we just dropped, or that we just added, or that would be in our latest release. And so we kind of got them to elaborate a little bit more and express things further. And basically, they started down this path of expressing how they felt demoralized by the 6-month release cycle, and that they were basically unable to ever catch up because their minimum turnaround time for certifying a new release of OpenStack was 6 months. That tended to be more like 8 or 9 months. So basically they're somewhere like 6 cycles back, and that means they'll never ever catch up unless they are able to make drastic changes in OpenStack or how they operate. And if you think about how that sort of problem space, that's really a business problem, but it should have some feedback into the technical process and development. Because if we're moving too quickly, or we're trying to still move too quickly, then we're doing them a disservice and making it harder for them to adopt and use our software. And we're actually increasing their burden as an operator, because there may be some things or fixes that they absolutely need that they're now having to keep as backports, and they're having to build development around it when they could just get the latest version. But they can't get the latest version because it has to go through their certification process. So this operator expressed this, and then additional operators kind of start chiming in. It's like, yes, same exact problem. It takes us 6+ months to certify, and it's a risk management issue. And then developers started chiming in with frustration about the release cycle, myself included. And a lot of this it's a driver of a lot of frustration on both sides of development and operators, that we try and scramble as much as possible to get a 6-month release out with the latest new features. And when those features may never actually be able to be loaded up and used by some of the people even developing them for their own environments, because they'll probably have to cherry pick them down and run them locally, which increases their technical debt, which makes it harder to certify things. You kind of hopefully get the picture at this point. And I see Thierry wants to speak. So by all means, Thierry.
Yeah, I just wanted to give some perspective on how we basically solved that discussion last time we raised it, because it's not the first time we've been discussing this, and probably because it's not like there is no great solution to the problem, but maybe the trade-off needs to be revisited, and it's important that we ask that question regularly. Last time, the way we solved it was by saying that basically fast forward upgrades would allow deployments to skip releases and to skip certification of certain releases, and therefore the pressure to upgrade would be less. I suspect that from the feedback you got, that did not really happen, or like people feel pressured to upgrade to every single release, or like something is not working with the plan that we basically came up with 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
I think it's part of it. And I think it does come down to how organizations perceive risk management. Like I've talked with some non-OpenStack folks over the years, at banks specifically. And they always go major version. They never skip releases, or they never jump anything, which means that they are basically stuck in this certification process constantly. And having worked in litigation services for myself, a long time ago, we basically did the same thing. And we did it because we were burned by firmware, we were burned by software. You can't test everything in every matrix. So we ran into issues, and as such, we decided we had to slow down to do the right thing to keep our services reliable for our customers. And we, at that point, just couldn't skip anything. And it increased our pain dramatically.
I think that's a real troubling. I mean, I've certainly been burned by that as well in the past, but just because other projects didn't take due care there and make it difficult, I guess, doesn't mean that you should lose all hope in the world and assume that it's always going to be that way. But I guess I'm really not sure how. Like, it's one thing to slow down, but I'm not really sure how that actually ends up with people getting anything faster, unless people are just like so dead set on deploying every release, and they're still working on Okada and they refuse to go through any skipping at all. And so if it always takes them 7 months to deploy a 6-month thing, they'll never catch up. But I mean, like, that's just kind of bonkers. So if we double the time or have our release velocity, how are they going to get things quicker, like features and things?
So okay, I guess there's a couple things we should probably consider. OpenStack's not seen as shiny and new. It's more seen as a stable, reliable, usable platform. So they don't feel the need they absolutely must consume things that quickly. Too, it's a double-edged sword of sorts there. But people really need these things, and there are a ton of Okada clouds still out there. There's a ton of Rocky clouds still out there. There's people are slowly upgrading, but it's just, if it takes them forever to get to the next version, and the solution as developers is to slow down. That does free some of our capacity up to be a little more coordinated, or possibly do intermediate releases and allow some of the operators that do need those newer features to get those features much faster. It does come down to everyone's risk tolerance level and how they can mechanically move through their processes.
I mean, I I can see the pain point that you bring from other users, but I also see, I mean, this is like, there's no right answer. If you go yearly, you have the other issue of, if I want to land something in OpenStack, and I'm an organization that 100% relies on upstream and doesn't like to cherry pick things down, I've got to sit and wait a year now before I see my thing arrive or show up in the upstream stuff. So now the people that want to move quick are the ones that have to be the ones that sit with backported stuff. Meanwhile, the kind of slower people, are they actually going to start getting faster? I mean, like I said, Thierry mentioned fast forward upgrades was like a thing, or like a framework that was trying to help them accomplish that, and it didn't. So is the problem the resources, or is it like the framework? Like, maybe even if you did 3-year release cycles, it would still like it's still not have people not upgrading.
It doesn't sound to me like FFU. I mean, FFU is just a plan anyway. It's not like a thing you download and install.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me like there's some sort of fundamental misunderstanding about whether it's safe to do that or not, or whatever. I mean, basically, I think what we said by declaring that plan was that we understand that people are going to do this. We're going to do our best to not burn you and just randomly change something in the middle of a thing that doesn't fit, you know, these things. Like, we expect you're going to run database migrations and data migrations for each thing, but outside of that, you know, we're not going to completely hose you. And that should be our declaration that, you know, if we break it, we own it. So it's safe to take this approach, and that gives us both ways, right? It gives us the fast way and the slow way, and so
I think it's
I guess
somewhat tested too. I think that's like how the Red Hat OpenStack product, like, I think it relies on that, or does something like that.
So and OOO, I think, has that stuff built in. So yeah, you could certainly choose your releases carefully to align with somebody else that happens to be doing a lot of testing, and, you know, maybe do a good job. But you know, even we don't like always have the same granularity between our jump points. So I don't know. It seems that if I worry, based on the way Julia described it, and maybe it was just the wording, but I worry that it's a perception thing and not like, well, we tried this for 6 cycles and, you know, we got burned 3 of them, so we don't want to do it anymore.
I don't think it's necessarily gotten burned by us, but I think it's a business processes have become such that, especially when the business is basically built upon the platform, that risk must be managed very carefully. And so then you end up you must only go major version to major version, or coordinated release to coordinated release. We could conceivably allow for a more flexible release model where we go, okay, everything's coordinated once a year and things can move independently, and we can keep a tested matrix. And that way there's still the delegated, delineated, this is OpenStack as a release, named release. And then there's these projects are moving at X speed with these version releases or these fixes or changes. And projects, as long as projects test at matrix, then I would think it's okay. But again, it's not necessarily anything a technical pattern or process is going to fix. It's a comfort level of the business that uses the software. And I've heard this from operators the last couple of years, where it's just they've become so risk adverse that any major thing is perceived as risk and thus is deferred or drawn out as much as possible so that they are comfortable with it. And usually those processes take months. So, I mean, I literally had a platform I was using at a prior job. We were 2 years behind. Part of that was business risk management. The other part was our certification process to get that hardware and software combination into the data center. So it's not like we're the only people with this problem too.
So as an operator, I relate a lot with what Julie is saying. So in a large organization that deploys a lot of OpenStack projects, we basically say that every day is an upgrade day because we are always trying to keep pace with all the releases of the different projects. And we try to do this by project, so try to not overlap upgrades. So this is very hard. However, I also understand the other side, that when you release maybe will not solve the problem for all the other clouds that are still running Okata, Rocky. For me, the question is why these deployments running these old releases still keep doing it. It's mainly because they are afraid to upgrade. And it takes a lot of time to test all of these things. One thing that as an operator I eat a lot is that the deprecation period of something in OpenStack, it's usually 2 releases cycles. Am I correct? And of course, if you lose the boat, basically then it starts to be very complicated. And when we are upgrading and we see that some of the configuration options were just renamed, but they still keep there, this creates a lot of friction for operators to upgrade, because then they need to deal with all these different things. It's not just upgrading packages, it's all these different configuration options that they need to figure out, even if it's in the release notes. But this is very, very hard for large infrastructures with a lot of projects. So for me, continue to try to simplify the upgrade process will be the key for all of this.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And I think a big part of that is the fact that we've been very liberal in how you deploy OpenStack. We don't have like an OpenStack deployment tool, and that is the tool to use. Some of the other projects like Kubernetes has a kubeadm, and that's just like something that just like takes care of everything for you. So you don't have to know about all the details and everything. But having said that, I think the sticking point to what you're saying is maybe an idea could be something where, when you're doing upgrades, projects can automatically, but that's the thing, right? Like if a project could rewrite its config file to have all the updated values, that's great. But guess what? Everyone's using config management at large scale, and your stuff is going to overwrite it the second that the project does that, right? So it doesn't help that much more. I don't know. It just seems to me like, OpenStack is work. It's not, just put it on and it just does its thing.
It is, and it's not necessarily a technical problem. That it's a more of a human and perception problem that we have. And ultimately, it comes down to risk management in the business and their tolerance for it or intolerance. And at the same time, I know as a developer and contributor, the 6-month cycle bothers me to no end. For me, it's frustrating, but.
So what's frustrating about it? Like, is it
the coordinated
the
coordinated release process and the lack of really basically get told we have to do X, Y, and Z, and it's like, seriously, we're doing it and we're adhering to trying to coordinate as best as possible. But you didn't look at the thing and see our other things and our processes and how we're actually a different release cycle model. And there's a lot of context that gets lost in that. and it's for me as a project leader, it's frustrating too.
Yeah. So from a release management perspective, one thing we could do is encourage everyone to do intermediary releases and then only do a coordinated release every year, because that would have the benefit. Like we've not listed all the benefits of switching to 1 year releases. It's not just like reduce upgrade pressure or certification burden, but also from an upstream perspective, it would result in less stable branches. So you could basically support older OpenStack releases for a longer time because you would have less branches to maintain. And all our efforts to have like longer term, like specific releases be more like a long-term support and others be short-lived is not really worked either. Like everyone is maintaining a bit everything. So in the end, if we did, like what would be the main drawback if we adopted something where there would be only one coordinated release every year, but we would still encourage projects to release more often so that features can be put out for the people that are waiting for features. They could upgrade just one component and get that feature really fast. And then you would still have like a good cadence in terms of engagement of your teams, but you would be free to define it however you want rather than have to adhere to this 6-month cycle, which might be too often or not often enough based on the stage of the project. And so I guess the drawbacks we would still have with that model is the tested upgrade matrix, because you would basically have like two styles of upgrades, people that would do all the intermediary releases and people that would upgrade from stable release to stable release. But I guess that's already the case for like all the projects that are already in intermediary releases, release model. So what's your, like, what would be the main drawbacks of that, like trade-off, I guess?
I have a small kind of question, if you don't mind, Thierry. Like, I like that idea, but how does that work when it comes to integration? Because if, let's say, Ironic wants to move at a quicker pace and release a specific feature, now all of a sudden, like, I don't know, Ironic 12.0, which was not the coordinated release version, it's 11.0, is compatible with Nova 11, but not compatible anymore. And so, like, how do we figure that part out? Like, can you make these intermediary releases, but they have to be still compatible with the rest of OpenStack? Or
so
if
go ahead.
So take the Nova case, because Nova consumes everybody, right? So you've got, if you've got basically two versions of Nova that people can come from, right? You've got to test upgrade from the last coordinated release to master and the last intermediate release, or whatever your 6-month unnamed thing is, to master. And then you've got all of the projects that Nova depends on that also have those as well. So Cinder starts to go off and has released a thing, but we need that new attachment API for our new code, but we have to be able to operate with, you have not upgraded the old one yet, and maybe you came from the older last named release of Nova, so you haven't run the data migration yet that fixed the connector in our database for the new Cinder. It like super much explodes the testing matrix. Whereas right now we have, everything coming from last coordinated release to master and, last master, but that delta is really small. And I just, while I have the green box around me, I wanted to unpack one other thing that Thierry said, which was about the number of stable branches. That argument doesn't resonate with me at all, I guess, because the ability for us to support back a certain amount of time does not really match to number of stable branches to me. It's just delta, right? Like if nothing has changed in the Nova console service, I can backport stuff to, Folsom, no problem, right? But if stuff has changed is when it starts to become a problem. And so you're still going to have 2 years worth of change. You're going to have fewer, get cherry pick commands to run, but that's not the difficult part. The difficult part is, okay, there was a big conflict here. I think I've got it resolved, but I'm really not sure. And the tests that run on this 2-year-old release have been pared down so much that I'm not getting a lot of coverage anymore because of all the external dependencies and risky. So I guess I'm not sure that really gets us much in terms of, more stable branch support.
I actually agree with what you just said regarding stable branches. Stable branches are my nightmare of sorts. The delta is not that much. It's everything else breaking.
Well, yeah. And that's purely time-based, right? Like,
yeah,
stuff be breaking.
Yeah, if I try and go to Queens, it's good luck. If I need to go to train, that's usually pretty easy and pretty reliable. But yeah, it's all the other external dependencies changing and breaking. And the testing, you're right about the testing model. That's absolutely something, but it doesn't necessarily have to be required or mandated. It could be you're on your own voyage at that point, and the community could be doing the best possible job, or the community can't have the tenants, or the project have the tenants where they do not break things, or they communicate how they break things or change things. So it really comes down to what does the project do and how do they do it. And as a project that has been doing this for a while, it's actually not horrible. We actually live and operate by a tenet of not breaking things. So go ahead.
Well, I think we all do. I really don't think that all the projects going off and kind of doing their own intermediate schedules and confusing what the picture looks like is going to increase the clarity for operators. And I also think that none of the projects that I have a strong say in would I recommend that we claim to, have these intermediate releases and a coordinated release and not test the upgrades, because that's where the stuff gets really hairy, and it just 100% will massively increase our testing footprint and our CI infrastructure requirement footprint, because grenade jobs are expensive, and we're gonna have to blow that out a little bit in order to have any sort of confidence for operators that this works.
Well, I have an idea which maybe kind of relates to some of the stable branch discussion that we were talking about, or the stable policy. Maybe we could allow projects to backport features and allow them to make not a major release. So, oh God, whatever the middle bit is that I'm completely forgetting right now, but not a minor patch update. And so they can go ahead and do and release that. And so as long as they continue to integrate properly with the rest of OpenStack within that coordinated release, then they're fine. Which then allows projects to ship all the features that they need, and not ship anything that breaks any other part of OpenStack. And if they want to ship something that breaks another part of OpenStack, then they have to do it in a way that's backwards compatible. So if, let's say, Ironic wants to publish something that breaks the version of Nova because it has a different API or something, then Nova needs to have some sort of compatibility so it can interact with both or something like that. And they can only remove it once the next coordinated release would happen. And so that way projects can move at their own velocity, and they have that kind of 2 points in time in a year where they get a full reset on being able to start with stuff that break, because they'll assume that it'll be the same kind of serious project that's running. I don't know if I explained that in a good way. Maybe somebody can tell me if that wasn't clear.
I think I lost you there. isn't that what we already have with projects that go with a non-coordinated release? They release when they want and they can get stuff out.
Yeah, but I think they can't backport and add like features to older releases.
Oh, you mean backport features to stable branches?
Well, maybe I'm not up to the whole stable branch stuff in this specific case, but I'm assuming they're cutting releases off the stable branch, or
No, like for intermediary releases, you basically just release features and whatever, like whenever you want, and then we pick the latest intermediary release to be part of the coordinated like 6 months release. So you can do that. What you can't do right now is backporting features to like a previous stable branch, a previous release. That's more like a choice, I guess. It's a bit orthogonal to this discussion, but it could clearly be changed. Like we just communicated that stable branches would only contain very safe patches, so you should be able to upgrade those really safely. But we could also say that they're more like moving objects, but then the pressure to backport things would get potentially messy, as everyone would want their pet features backported to their pet release.
In some cases, like no API versioning things, we have like micro version. It's not possible.
Well,
for API related things to backport, right?
And RPC and database and RPC. Objects. So I mean, if the goal is not to make Okada, live forever, I don't think that backporting features back there is going to help that, right? Because that's what people are just going to do. They're going to, and they're going to be like, look, I'm on Okada. I really, really need you to backport this thing from Xena, and sweet, now I can stay on Okada for another 20 years.
Yeah, so it's not a good idea to enable that. But there's somewhere we need to find a happy medium between all these different contentious things, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring the discussion. So one thing worth noting. Oh, sorry.
Juliet, if I like to say like moving to few of other topic, but if you are related, few of the things related, go ahead.
We actually had a comment in the YouTube stream. Basically, if I'm interpreting the comment correctly, basically they end up putting efforts to upgrade on hold when they're building something on top of OpenStack because they need a stable, unchanging platform, and then they run into situations where they cannot afford the time and resources to do the upgrades with the regression testing while they're doing the other work. So it's kind of, there are many people with multiple moving pieces all at the same time.
But that's exactly
projects.
That's going to be exactly the same thing with 1 year releases, except the releases are going to be twice as big and have twice as many destabilizing things per release, right? So they're going to be even more afraid to upgrade when they need things not to move, when we've got a year's worth of stuff packed into each seam, right?
Potentially. I mean, everyone's risk level and tolerance is completely different.
I don't see how that doesn't. I mean, that all that does is raise risk. It just makes the risk less often, in my opinion. I don't.
Rather than having smaller stepping points that you're like, okay, this is a reasonable chunk that I can, consume and upgrade to, I feel like you'll end up with a huge chunk of stuff.
Right. Instead of a 6-week upgrade cycle twice a year, you'll end up with one 12-week cycle, and everyone will hate you. It seems like to me.
I think the problem is people are running 6+ month upgrade cycles in terms.
No, I understand.
They're doing their regression testing, but I think this is where the disconnect of work size of units and effort versus the way a entity, being a business or an operator, operates is if they can't necessarily consume the smaller chunk because of policy. Like I know people that live in organizations where you cannot do a minor release. You must do major releases only. and you can only do major releases once a year. And these things seem like arbitrary, crazy things, but it's how the business has chosen to manage its risk. So that cascades into everyone's daily life of how do I manage my cloud?
And when that moves to 2 years, should we slow down to 2-year cycles? I mean, we provided a way to not have to consume every granule, and we've said that we will own it if it breaks. Obviously we're not going to meet everybody's really. I mean, I have at least one customer who can't hit a 12-month certification cycle. Very specifically, just not going to happen. And they're doing FFUs, so it's not. The 6-month thing is not a thing, but I mean, like, that's a significant chunk of even a slower coordinated FFU to FFU cycle. 1-year release isn't going to help them either in terms of fitting in all of their certification stuff. So I guess I'm just not sure where it ends.
I think the conundrum ends up being, once an operator is at such an infrastructure size where we're talking thousands of machines, their risk starts just dropping to nothing. They have no risk tolerance.
I think that we've got
their risk goes through the roof, and they have no risk tolerance. Because
we have two people with thousands of boxes here, right? I mean, Mohammed and Belmiro have a few boxes each, I think.
Yeah,
Got a couple. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 7 now.
Time check, we have around 20 minutes left. So we have discussed a lot about upgrade and stable thing. So let's cover a few other points we have on Etherpad. And I'll go one by one, and if I miss anything, feel free to interrupt me. So first is on line number 160 about the foundation marketing effort. So is it something, the current release model creating an issue for foundation marketing effort, or it's just an idea like it can be more aligned and it can be helpful?
Well, I think that's something that'll be hard. I mean, from the marketing point of view, I don't know if it's going to be, it's probably not a thing to say, but, marketing will always have things to talk about throughout. But I think one of the hard things is when you have such a long release cycle, it's kind of hard to keep people engaged and have some sort of like exciting news, or like, hey, this thing came up, or this thing just happened, or we're going to do this thing. So it kind of just slows down the things you can talk about. And especially if we're not also releasing new features, then, well, there's not much to talk about other than like, here's this thing that got released 8 months ago that we're talking about today, because we don't really have much to talk about. I feel like that's one thing. The other thing is also the PTGs are also going to like be much more split out, and we lose that continuous cycle of like staying up to date. So I don't know, it's two things like that.
That one is the marketing version of my comment below about release notes, right? The release notes become so large, double the size. Your marketing thing becomes half as often and twice as much, right? So you probably only get to like put a certain number of bullet points in front of whoever reads the marketing stuff every time you do that, right? So you just literally, you can't be like, all right, guys, well, instead of reading this one sheet, we're going to ask you to read 2 sheets because we've slowed down our thing, right? No, there's going to be 1 sheet, and like half as much stuff is going to get mentioned to people because we're doing it half as often.
We actually see that today with Ironic. We have lots of smaller features that go in, and when it comes to marketing, we get 3, 4, maybe, or
yeah,
we kind of do a high level mention of things, but it's like the list of the release notes is already a book for a cycle.
Yeah. So I mean,
if we end up doing intermediary releases, then we could like explain some of the features that were released during. Like I wouldn't sweat it too much with the marketing part, because it feels like first, like today we're pushing less changes than we used to back in 2015, where when we had like features all over the map. So in terms of quantity of features to like present at the end release marketing meeting, I don't think that's that different. It's more like, how do you keep the engagement throughout the year than the massive amount of marketing news you have at the end of the year. My concern would be more that like people lose sight of OpenStack for 1 year, and all the people that think it's dead will only will wait a year before realizing they were wrong, rather than 6 months. And the other thing is like when you do those intermediary releases, we could have like, if there is one feature we want to hype, or a project we want to show that they are making great progress, we could basically talk about that project in particular. But that brings us back to the testing metrics, and if it's really a no, and there is just no way we can make it work, then I would definitely not support switching to 1 year releases if we can't have like intermediary releases to get features out to users and keep the news cycle on exciting and people in a cadence of doing things. It's difficult to do 1 year releases without nothing in between, for like keeping the excitement outside but also inside. So I would prefer like intermediary releases basically.
That news cycle is not just important for engaging people via marketing stuff. It's also important for keeping the community engaged and whatnot, right? I mean, like this is why 2-week sprints are an agile thing, right? To like keep everybody moving, keep everybody synchronized, keep the goals and the achieving of the goals kind of within your kind of like temporal frame of reference and everything. And a year is a long time, I mean, to go between those milestones.
And even if you see like the number of full-time contributors are reducing in OpenStack day by day. So if, say, for example, in my company, I say, okay, I have 1 year for OpenStack to do all these features and all, they will obviously ask me, okay, let's do some of the other stuff for downstream. So that's the very much valid point for non-full-time upstream developer.
Yeah, and thinking out loud as well is like, well, and sorry, I know we're talking about the marketing stuff, but that definitely I think is important, is, most folks that are working on OpenStack are salaried and they're working on things. And so if it takes a year, if they're working on something and, they decide to move on and do something else, when you're working with a year, you might end up with a bunch of stuff that's half-baked. Whereas with 6 months, it's more likely for things to be driven and finished up in that 6-month cycle. But I don't know how related that is.
Yeah, that's true. And few further aspect we see, like there are a few comments on Etherpad, like for how much process we might need to change if we move to the one release cycle, like deprecation policies or stable policies you already talked about, and maybe about the testing things, how much like we support as per the stable versus extended maintenance and all this stuff. And obviously the PTL and TC term, that's also leadership is one of the big questions for us, because in every cycle we face the leadership issues for many projects, and in many of the project peoples or PTLs are volunteering with their extra effort. So with 1 year release needs a 1 year commitment from them. So that's also one aspect. Maybe leadership, because we can have more issues with this 1 year release, or maybe less. So that's my point. I think we might face more issues in that.
Yeah, I mean that's a reasonable point, but no one's forced to stay for a year. If they decide that they want to move on or hand things over, they can. And so I think that should be the.
But you don't like take a site, you don't like take a or stand for PTL thinking, oh, I'm going to quit halfway through, right? You're like,
Yeah.
am I going to do this? And right now it's a 6-month thing and we're not able to get people to even commit to that or stick around for it. So I think it's a big problem. I think that, it's going to be something where we have to fundamentally change the mapping if we were to do something like that. And then of course TC is twice as long, and we know how that went last cycle. So
yeah, I feel like coordinated again. If we do intermediary releases, you could have like a PTL that is tied to a shorter cycle. Doesn't necessarily have to be 1 year. So again, I'm not sure. It's definitely a problem if we just do 1 year releases. But if we manage to somehow make intermediary releases work across the board, then it's not that much of a problem, because the only thing special about the coordinated release is that we maintain a stable release out of it. It's the only thing that makes it special.
Well, it's also the high impact, most important, potentially, getting all the ducks lined up on the important release. So
yeah, and
whether or not
feature freeze pressure, because that's the important one, and you need your feature in that important one. There is like friction everywhere. I'm not saying it's the miracle solution, but I just don't see the like moving from 6 months how we do things currently to 1 year. I don't see that working for all the reasons you mentioned. And I could see like a model where we would have intermediary releases and 1 year stable releases. I could see that work. But it has benefits and it has drawbacks, but maybe the testing metrics problem is just not something we know how to solve, in which case that's also a no-no.
Well, so me as an operator now, if that's what we start doing and I need to upgrade, right, and I'm running a survey and I want to go to Victoria, do I go to tip of Victoria, or do I have to go to the intermediary release, then like Victoria's first release? Like, what's my plan at that point? Because right now it's very straightforward for deployers. You just go to the next release and you're good to go.
And also, do you are you willing to upgrade just your Cinder to one of those intermediate releases to get a feature, or in reality, do you wait for the fully coordinated, fully tested, everything matches thing? Because if you wait, then all we've done is slow down the fire hose. If you do, we've got all the potential, maybe additional documentation or gotchas with like, okay, well, how do I need to tell Nova that, I've got, now I've got a new Cinder and an old Nova. So what's the impact there? That's part of the testing matrix thing too, Thierry, is like, when Cinder releases a new thing that they expect to be used as part of their, more aggressive intermediate release, they've also got to kind of assume that people are going to run that not with the kind of somewhat temporally matching, they landed patches in Nova and Cinder to go together, but they need to make sure that the documentation and the prescriptions also cover what happens if you didn't upgrade your Nova because I only upgraded Cinder to get that feature, right? So that's like the human testing matrix part.
Well, as an operator, justifying intermediated releases, it will be very difficult. So you have the stable release. If you have something then in an intermediated release that you really want, it's a huge risk. I think most of the people will just go for the stable one.
Right, which effectively means we're doing that additional work in the middle for not a whole lot of gain. And if everybody slows down to the 1 year cycle anyway, we've just slowed down our delivery.
So
Yeah, and one more point. In that we have to think about the hierarchical dependency in that also. Like for Nova depending on the Cinder for one feature, but Cinder depending on someone else for another feature. So that also make it more complex.
Yeah.
So here's a possibility, and I'm mentally going back in time, a long time, and I'm thinking one of the best things I ever did in a project was we created a tenet of the user or operator should always be able to upgrade from any version we release. Now, that's hard to actually test, of course, but somehow we got into this pattern of we only want to support have upgrades from within the prior release or 2 releases or 3 releases back. And that meant that upgrade code got deleted and that's not ideal. So I think one of the things that we could do is say we have a tenet of you should be able to upgrade from say Victoria or Train to whatever the next F release is or whatever, and be able to do it seamlessly and it just work.
Well, I would love to be able to say that too, but I mean,
I know it's an ambitious thing, but that would also give people and organizations a much higher level of trust in the software. It would also change how we make changes, but
it won't give them more trust if we can't test it, and if we can't test it, it's not going to work.
Yeah,
I mean,
we have to test it.
Nova has so much larger of a problem of this than everybody else because Nova runs on thousands of boxes in a deployment where most of the other services run on like 3. And there's data that has to be collected from those boxes sometimes during an upgrade when we need topology information that only that box can tell us. Like not being able to assume at any point in the cycle that we have got information collected in the previous cycle or the cycle before that, just means that like all of our database columns have to be nullable forever. And we always have to do, an if none check everywhere. And then, you think you can make an RPC call to a compute node and that it's going to have this available and it might not. I mean, it just introduces a massive amount of debt into the code. And when you run on thousands of boxes in each deployment, that's really, really, really substantial.
But I also don't know if that will even like resolve the whole it takes me 7 months to certify and the release is 6 months. Like if that's kind of what we're like, I think if you focus on what are we trying to solve is, are we trying to help out some of those deployers that can't keep up? Or are we trying to help our developers ship code faster? Or like, what's the root thing that we're trying to resolve?
Well, I think that Julia is exactly right that we want to not lose trust, right? We do not want to give them any more concern over the upgrade process. And to me, any upgrades are hard. Anything that's not tested, we should assume is broken, like anything. And the larger we increase the scope of things that we say will work but that aren't tested, trust goes down in that equation to me.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I mean, if people were feeling already pretty skeptic about doing an upgrade, and they run into an issue that hurts, they're probably not going to do it next time, or they're going to try to dread it as much as they can because they're like, this is painful. Remember last time what happened? And so because we were not testing it, then someone shows up to IRC and is like, hey, I'm running into this issue. And we're like, whoops, no, there's no tests that are testing the upgrade that you're doing. Looks like you're going to have to figure out how to fix the code or something along those lines. And so I feel like that might negatively impact, for sure, the perception that upgrades are hard and make it even harder. Whereas now, I mean, I understand people have the whole certification stuff that they're doing and all this other things that, you know, but for the upstream code, it just works and we test it, and we have tests that are testing upgrades all the time, making sure that they're working properly. There's still going to be small things that show up, but I think that, I don't know, I find that what we currently have is working pretty neat. I think my only concern here is maybe we just need to talk to that organization and see if there's something else we can do to help them, you know, be able to certify faster, or talk through them through like, hey, maybe you could follow the OOO FFU path, and that's the sort of thing that you can go towards, and maybe do a little bit more of explaining and talking rather than changing policy to adapt.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we could literally just start releasing major releases for every release, and technically they could upgrade to anything at any time at that point.
Right, we can just tell them anything will work and then wait for it to break. But
Sure, guys, we are just, I think, 1 minute left for our session. So I'd like to conclude us like how we wanted to go further on this. Do you want to continue it on tomorrow, or if we have covered pretty much all the topics, maybe we can think about the action item from here, like as Mohammed mentioned, going towards those operator and get the feedback.
So can I ask a quick question? So
yep.
two of our largest operators are here, and this isn't a concern for them. Is this an education issue, perhaps, that we could address it that way?
There's, sorry.
And messaging. I think that what Mohammed was just saying actually is maybe a good first step is to let's communicate. Look, I don't know if you guys remember or know, maybe you have shown up since the whole FFU thing, but FFU is a thing that we expect to work, and we take responsibility to make sure that it doesn't break. And that allows you to do the following thing. We expect that to work. If you want to not deploy every release, or certainly every 6 months, this is what we expect you to do. We expect it to work. You know, communicate what that means again, and again, communicate the support that we have for it, and see if that helps people be less
afraid. I think it makes sense, and we can start with our mailing list discussion and ops meetup if we still have ops meetup things. But I think as a first step, I think we can conclude this on mailing list and continue the discussion where we have operators and other operator channel also, like ops meetup or some of their meetings.
I think we can come up with some action items tomorrow on this, so we can help the close.
Yeah, I think
so. Say tomorrow we can get the action items.
Let's do that.
So we'll continue with the action item tomorrow. So we have, I think, 1 minute left. So I'll hand over to Ashlee to wrap up the things and present for the next week episode. So Ashlee, on you.
Great. Thanks, Ghanshyam. Well, thanks to you and the entire TC for including us today and letting us see a little bit into your world during the PTG. It was awesome to get a behind the scenes look from some of those conversations, and thanks for interacting with our YouTube audience. That was great. So we're also hoping to do an Ask Me Anything episode with this group soon as well, so stay tuned for that. And be sure to join us next week for a recap of the PTG. And we'll let y'all get back to your meeting.
Oh, thanks, Ashlee. And thanks everyone for joining. And this ends our today TC PTG. So tomorrow we are going to meet at 13 UTC for 4-hour discussion. And obviously we'll have a break in between. So join us tomorrow for further discussion or anything you'd like to discuss what we have on Etherpad. Thanks everyone, and have a good day, evening, and night.
Take care all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.